The great halls of the Velthari Council trembled as the final decree echoed across the crystalline walls. Their planetary defenses had fallen, their fleets scattered like sparks in a storm. The Zevrik Empire, a war machine spanning dozens of systems, had unleashed its final ultimatum: unconditional surrender or total annihilation. The counselors, draped in flowing robes of shimmering silver, debated in soft, sorrowful tones. They had always prized survival above all: retreat and submit, preserve what life they could. Honor was an outdated concept from a time before they took to the stars. Their people wept in the streets as the Zevrik warships descended, their hulls blacker than the void. Thousands of sleek, insectal fighters fanned out like a plague, blotting out the skies. The Velthari Council prepared the broadcast of their surrender, faces solemn, voices shaking as they read the prepared text. We yield to the Zevrik Empire in the interest of preserving life and cultural memory. But before the final words could leave their lips, a single human stepped forward. Captain Elias Vaughn, survivor of 12 planetary campaigns, stood at the edge of the Grand Assembly Plaza. His armor was battered, a patchwork of scorched plating and hastily welded repairs. His rifle was slung across his back, but he did not raise it. Instead, he looked up at the descending fleet and took one deep, ragged breath. Reports would later say they felt it first, a vibration that rolled across the marble tiles and climbed the spires. Then they heard it, echoing across every corridor and balcony, a roar. Not a scream of fear, not a whimper of despair, but a primal, defiant roar that cracked the cold silence of surrender into 1,000 pieces. Vaughn's voice carried like thunder in a storm. Every Velthari turned toward him, stunned. Even the Zevrik warships paused mid-formation, as if a great creature had snarled at them from the dark. In that moment, Vaughn's presence dwarfed the vastness of the enemy fleet. His roar was a refusal, a reminder that humans had never truly learned to bow. In the old Earth stories, there were always warriors who stood alone at the gate, legends of defenders who would rather die on their feet than kneel. Vaughn embodied all of them now, a single spark raging against an ocean. The Velthari felt something stirred deep within, a warmth that their ancestors had long abandoned. They remembered old songs of resistance, of ancestors who stood against storms and beasts, who fought even when their hands were empty. One by one, they began to step forward, some hesitating, some trembling. A young Velthari medic dropped her white staff and picked up a discarded energy blade. An elderly counselor cast off his ceremonial robe and wrapped his trembling fingers around an old plasma pistol. Above, the Zevrik commanders watched in confusion. Their orders were to accept surrender, but instead they saw a fractured people rising, emboldened by one roaring human. When Vaughn unslung his rifle and charged forward alone toward the landing zone, the first shots echoed across the plaza. The Velthari joined him. Hesitant at first, but then all at once, a tide of shimmering bodies flooding forward, screaming their own battle cries. They threw aside doctrine and protocol, embracing the madness of the moment. Vaughn was everywhere, a blur of movement, shielding fallen Velthari with his own body, tossing grenades into advancing Zevrik squads, rallying the line with every guttural shout. They fought for hours, turning the marble plaza into a war-scorched crater. The Zevrik, masters of overwhelming force, found themselves choked by the sudden surge of defiance. No matter how many fell, more rose, pulling weapons from the dead or fighting with bare claws. Vaughn kept roaring, even when shrapnel tore through his leg, even when blood soaked his armor. As dusk fell and fires licked the skyline, the remaining Zevrik ships began to pull back. Their commanders, calculating in cold, decided the cost was no longer worth it. They had underestimated the strength that could be drawn from a single human's defiance. They disengaged, leaving behind smoldering wreckage and stunned silence. At dawn, the Velthari gathered among the ruins. Bodies lay everywhere, but in their eyes burned a new light, a fierce pride they hadn't known for generations. Vaughn lay slumped against a shattered pillar, breath ragged, helmet discarded. Velthari healers rushed to him, but he only smiled, blood coating his teeth. "Don't ever kneel again," he whispered, before passing into unconsciousness. In the years that followed, the Velthari rebuilt. They told stories of that day to every newborn, of the council who had chosen surrender, and the human who had chosen to roar. Vaughn's armor was enshrined in their new Hall of Honor, his words carved into every public square. Where once they had lived by caution and compromise, they now lived by courage and fierce independence. Even centuries later, when new enemies threatened, they did not seek terms, they stood. And they remembered that on the day their council surrendered, a single human rose alone, and with one roar taught an entire world how to live free.